y'all! So today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up and my July TBR. Now normally I am really excited to do my wrap-up and TBR videos. They're the ones that I most enjoy filming. However, I am especially excited today because June was my best reading month of the year so far, not only in quantity but also in quality. So in the month of June I managed to get through 4 novels and 1 graphic novel, and I know that doesn't sound like a huge amount, but 3 of these books are over 600 pages long, so I am incredibly satisfied with the amount of reading I got done during June. So the first book that I read in the month of June was Night Film by Marisha Pessl, which I read to fulfill my TBR jar challenge for the month, which was to read a book from a genre that I've been neglecting lately. And I really enjoyed this book. I really wanted to do a full video review on my channel, but I realized that it was really hard for me to discuss my feelings about this book verbally. So instead I did a full written review on my blog, which I will link down in the description. However, I will briefly talk about this book and tell you what it's about. So Night Film follows this disgraced journalist named Scott, whose name was dragged through the mud several years before this book when he dug too deep into the life of this cult horror film director named Cordova. And at the beginning of this book, Cordova's daughter commits suicide under some mysterious circumstances, and Scott takes it upon himself to delve once again into the life of Cordova. And like I said, it's really hard for me to describe my feelings about this book, but I will say that this is definitely one of the most immersive books that I have read. Often Scott will be doing some sort of research on the computer, and you'll get to see like the websites that he's on and images such like this, which just really add to the reading experience. And this book just messes with your mind. Like, I am not very easily affected by anything creepy or scary. I watched Saw for the first time while chowing down on a bowl of popcorn, and I go to see horror movies with my friends just to see them jump. But this book got to me. Like, I was creeped out while reading this book. Like, my feeling of paranoia while reading this was pretty high. Granted, I did discover while reading this book that my dorm is haunted, and so I found myself like, you know, checking behind me while I was walking down the hallway to make sure that there wasn't like a ghost behind me. But given the fact that I don't believe in ghosts and that the feeling of paranoia went away once I finished this book, I think I'm just gonna chalk it up to Night Film. So like I said, if you do want to hear more about my thoughts on this book, I do have the link to my full review on my blog down in the description, but I ended up giving this 9.5 stars out of 10, which translates to 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. So the next book that I read in the month of June was The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy. Y'all, this is like the best book that I have read since July 21st, 2007. Do you know what happened July 21st, 2007? Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows came out. Like, this is the best book that I have read since Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. I just honestly don't have the words to express how much I thoroughly loved this book. This trilogy has been making its way around BookTube, so I feel like I don't really need to explain what it's about, but I will give a pretty brief synopsis. The main character of this book is named Vin, and she is a 16-year-old who lives in the Final Empire, which is an empire that is ruled over by a dark lord named the Lord Ruler. And within this world there is this really cool type of magic called allomancy, where basically people ingest metals and use them for specific purposes. And there are 2 different types of allomancers. There are mistings who can use one type of metal, and there are mistborns which can use all types of metals. And at the beginning of this book, Vin discovers that she is a mistborn, and she kind of gets recruited into this thieving crew who want to take down the Lord Ruler. And the other kind of main character in this book is named Kelsier, and he is a Mistborn, and he's kind of the leader of the thieving crew and the mentor to Vin. And as much as I really want to do a review on this book, I think it would just be me saying, I love the world building, I love the characters, I love the plot. Like, I just loved everything about this. I think it's one of those books that I love too much to actually critique. Even though I really do love high fantasy, I was a little worried going in that it might be a little dense given that it is a high epic fantasy, but the writing is so easy to get into. Like, I just love it so much. The world build is fantastic, the characters are fantastic, the plot is fantastic. I love everything about this book. So obviously, 10 out of 10 stars. Best book I've read all year, best book I've read since the Harry Potter series. It is just outstanding. If you are interested in getting into fantasy, I would recommend this because it's really easy to get into. If you like fantasy, I would recommend this. Just read this book, you guys. So the next book that I read was The Fade Out Volume 1 by Ed Brubaker, illustrated by Sean Phillips, and I read this as kind of like a break from the Mistborn trilogy. Now I know you're probably like, Kristen, you didn't have this book at the end of April and you're on a book buying ban. Why do you have it? Well, I decided for my birthday that I was going to allow myself to buy one single book, and I decided on this one because it's short. I knew I was going to get to it immediately. It was fairly inexpensive, so I went for it and I read it pretty quickly after getting it. So this is the first in a new graphic novel series that is kind of a film noir murder mystery set in the 1940s. And I thought that this was just alright. I liked it and I feel like it's an interesting start to a series, but it almost feels like reading chapter 1 of like a 50 chapter book. It felt really incomplete and it didn't feel like it could really stand on its own. I mean, obviously it is the first volume in what I assume is going to be a fairly long graphic novel series, but it just felt kind of incomplete. However, it was fairly intriguing and I am interested to see what happens in the coming volumes. And I ended up giving this 7 stars out of 10, which translates to 3 out of 5 on Goodreads. The next book that I read in the month of June was The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, which is the second book in the Mistborn trilogy. And just like with The Final Empire, I loved this book so much. I would still say that I liked The Final Empire just slightly more than I liked this one, but I still gave this one 10 out of 10 stars. It was phenomenal. Like I said, the world is so amazing and I love the characters, and the new characters that were introduced into the story were really awesome, and the plot was so great. And just, if the third book is as good as the first two, this is going to be my absolute favorite series after Harry Potter. Like, this is so good, y'all. And finally, the last book that I read in June was The Leveler by Julie Durango. And this was a new release of June, so I promise I did not break my book buying ban to buy this. So I was really excited to read this book because it was giving me some Ready Player One vibes, and I've really been in the mood to reread Ready Player One lately. So The Leveler is about a girl named Nixie who is kind of like a bounty hunter in this virtual reality game called Meep. Meep is a fairly new technology in this story, and so players are limited as to how much time they can spend in it per day. And when parents are bothered by the amount of time that their kids are spending in Meep, they call on Nixie to kind of just retrieve them out of the game and pull them out. But then one day she gets a job from the guy who created the game. His son has blocked himself into the game and left a suicide note, and it's Nixie's job to retrieve him from Meep. However, Nixie quickly realizes that things are not exactly what they seem, because once she finds the guy, Win, within the game, he tells her that he is trapped there by someone and that he cannot get out. And so Nixie and Win must fight their way out of Meep if they want to get back to the real world. So that sounds like a really awesome concept, right? But it was actually kind of disappointing. The biggest problem for me in this book was the writing. It felt very juvenile. Like, normally writing is something that I tend to overlook and not think about very much, so when I do notice it, it either means it's really annoying or it's really great. And in this instance, it was annoying. I didn't feel like the dialogue was very good. It all, like I said, felt very juvenile, and even though the characters are 16, it almost feels like they're two 13-year-olds. It just seemed very juvenile, and there were some editing problems, like, not that sentences weren't structured correctly, but like the same word would be repeated over and over again. Like, they would say it's truly something and it's truly this and it's truly that, and I'm like, stop using the word truly. And on top of that, the plot was kind of all over the place. It was really intriguing to see Nixie get into Meep and to try to find Win, but once she found him, it was kind of like nothing really happened until the very end. And on top of this book suffered from insta-love, which was super cringeworthy and painful for me. However, the one redeeming quality about this book is that I feel like the series has potential. Despite the problems that I had with it, I still somewhat enjoyed it. Like, I liked it more than I disliked it. And the way that this book left off had me really curious about the real-world implications of what happened within Meep in this book. So despite the several problems that I did have with this book, I ended up giving it a 6 out of 10, which translates to 3 out of 5 on Goodreads. I don't think it was terrible. I liked it more than I disliked it, and I am intrigued to see what is going to happen next in this series. So since we've now reached the halfway point of 2015, I thought that this would be a good time to kind of talk about my reading challenges for the year and how I am doing so far and give some updates on them. My first reading challenge for 2015 was to read 50 books, and currently I'm sitting at 23, and Goodreads is telling me that I am 1 book behind, which for me isn't a big deal, and I'm sure I can catch up. My second reading challenge for the year was to read 5 books that are 700 pages or longer. And so far, I have only read 1 book that fulfills that, which is The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson. Unfortunately, although I have read several pretty long books so far this year, a lot of them have clocked in around the 500 or 600 page mark, and only The Well of Ascension so far has surpassed the 700 page mark. However, I do have several books that I'm planning to read very soon that will definitely surpass 700 pages, so once again, I am not worried about the fact that I am a little behind the point that I should be on this challenge. And transitioning into my TBR, my third and final reading challenge for 2015, is my TBR jar. So far in 2015, I have completed every challenge that I have pulled out of this jar, and I'm now going to be pulling out my July challenge to see what I'm going to have to complete in July. Like with this past month, I'm still really in the mood to reread Ready Player One, so I really hope that I end up pulling it out of the jar. I probably won't, but I really want to pull the reread challenge. Okay, let's pull a challenge out. This one. Okay. Let's see what challenge I got. So once again, I didn't get the reread challenge. With my luck, I'm not going to get it until like December. But I did get a challenge that works really well with my TBR, and that is to start a series. So while it's not the one I wanted, at least it doesn't throw a wrench into my TBR. So obviously the first book that I'm going to be reading in the month of July is The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson, which is the third and final book in the Mistborn trilogy. I have already started this one. I'm a little bit less than 100 pages into it. Obviously, I'm still loving it, and it shouldn't take me too long to finish this because these books are so fast-paced and so exciting, and I love them so much. The next book I'll be reading in July will actually be the longest book I've ever read, and that is The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson, which is the first book in the Stormlight Archive series, so this could work for my Start a Series challenge. Now that I have experienced how wonderful of an author Brandon Sanderson is, and I've heard so many wonderful things about this book, especially from Jeff from Ermagerd Books and Elizabeth from Elizabeth Page, I am just so excited to get into this and to see how amazing this is. The next book that I will definitely be getting to as soon as it is released is Armada by Ernest Cline, which comes out I think on July 14th. This is one of my most anticipated releases of the year, and I've already pre-ordered it. I cannot wait to have it in my hands and to read it. I am just so excited to finally be able to read this book this month. And from the description, it sounds like it's going to have a pretty similar vibe to Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, which, as I've mentioned many times just in this video alone, I absolutely love, so I cannot wait to finally read this. The next book that I'll be hopefully finishing in the month of July is The Bane Chronicles by Cassandra Clare. Since this is a bind-up of novellas, I'll probably just be using this to kind of take breaks from the very massive Brandon Sanderson books that I'll be reading. Because each of the novellas is like 50 pages long, I can get through it in one sitting. It's pretty short, and it's always fun because it's Magnus Bane. So yeah, hopefully I'll be finishing this in July. And I only have like 200 pages left, so that shouldn't be too hard to do. And the rest of my TBR is kind of up in the air. There are 3 books that I'm considering, and I'll most likely only get to 1 or 2, but I will go ahead and show you all 3 of them now. And coincidentally, all 3 of them are the first books in a series. So the first of those is A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, which is probably the one that I am most excited to get to out of those 3. This has been super high on my TBR ever since its release, and I just can't wait to get to it because I've heard so many wonderful things about it. However, if I finish the other 2 Brandon Sanderson books that I'm reading this month and feel like I need even more Brandon Sanderson in my life, I will be picking up The Rhythmatist, which is also a first book in a series. And if I'm in the mood for high fantasy but need a little bit of a break from Brandon Sanderson, I will probably be picking up The Queen of the Tearling by Erica Johansson. So this is the massive pile of books that I hope to get to in the month of July, plus Armada. Am I crazy? Maybe. But my goal is to read 100 pages a day. That's not terribly crazy for me for most books. However, I think this one might pose a little bit of a challenge to get through 100 in a day, but we will just have to wait and see. So that is it for my June wrap-up and my July TBR. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite book that you read in June was and what you're most excited to get to in July. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!